welcome, friends, to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate. It's all so that we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those tragedies and challenges and setbacks and failures that you faced or are facing right now, don't define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you. They happened for you. And no one I know knows that better than the founder of Beyond the Crucible, the host of the show, and my friend, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, let's cue broken record time as I say what I say every week during this series. We've got another robust episode as we talk in more detail about another profile in our Trials to Triumph self-assessment. So this is going to be a good one, right?
Absolutely. Very much looking forward to it.
And one of the reasons it's going to be a good one is this is the seventh episode of the series, which means this is the seventh time that we've had our friend Cheryl Farr with us to talk about all these things. And just to remind you folks, Cheryl Farr is the founder and chief strategist for Signal Brand Innovation and one of the major architects of our Trials to Triumphs self-assessment that we're going to be talking about. So Cheryl, welcome for episode 7. It's going to be like there's only one more episode after this with you, so I'm already going through withdrawals a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Thank you, Warwick. Thanks for having me again. I feel like I'm getting used to doing this on a regular basis. I'm going to be sad when it's over.
Well, we'll have to have you back for special guest hits after that.
Oh, that's fine.
And what we are talking about, folks, again, just to kind of level set us before we get going, is that we're talking about our statistically valid Trials to Triumph self-assessment, which offers those who take it details of a personal journey that is a bit like an endurance run. There are no sprints to the finish line or ways to cut the track. You've got to do the hard work of moving through each stage of your journey from your own personal "you are here" mark on that map. And you must do it at the speed that's right for you, what you've been through and where you're going. Hear me when I say this. It's not a competition. Everyone has their own clock. So please, 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 please feel no pressure to break the tape first. We've extended the running metaphor as an easy way to visualize the Trials to Triumphs roadmap and to understand its 6 unique starting points. This week, we're going to delve into the profile for In a Mad Dash. And Warwick, it's time for me to slow my dash down so you can get going with this episode. So take it away.
Well, thanks, Gary. And again, welcome again, Cheryl. This is going to be a fascinating conversation about a profile in a mad dash. So, Cheryl, what does in a mad dash mean?
So, Warwick, In a Mad Dash is a really interesting profile. Like 72% of respondents overall, In a Mad Dashers understand that they have had a crucible, right? A trauma or loss so significant that it's fundamentally changed the trajectory of their life. They actually recognize themselves as being angry about it. They actually have, now what makes them really interesting is that they know they're angry, but they have high vision and high reality scores. So they're moving toward a vision. They are turning that vision into reality, right? But they also know they're angry simultaneously. When asked if they're being held back, they're not sure if they're being held back, right? They're just running ahead, right? And so that juxtaposition of running toward a vision, turning that vision into reality, but still being angry and holding on to acknowledged anger about what's happened to them makes a really interesting profile, right? And they fundamentally leapt over the processing phase, right? Something has happened to them, some failure, some loss, some trauma, and they've just kept moving forward. They fundamentally leapt over that processing phase and are just moving toward continuing to execute against something without processing their pain or emotions. Super interesting. Now, why would that be happening? Why might they be doing that? They might be moving toward a vision and executing against that out of necessity. It could be a parent who lost their spouse but needs to be there for their children, right? It could that they still have to forge ahead, or somebody who's lost a job and has to jump immediately into finding a new job because they have to put food on the table. It could be they can be in a mad dash either by necessity or by choice or some combination. But the reality is they're not processing the pain yet. They're moving full steam ahead without processing the pain. Often this person is a high performer, right? That is really capable of sort of pushing the bad stuff aside and plowing ahead. So depending on where they are in their journey, they may appear successful and appear very capable, right? We really laud people often by saying, we laud people who say, oh, look at them just go. They're not being held back by the bad thing that's happened to them, right? We celebrate that. But in reality, we all have to take time at some point and stop and process our emotions when we've gone through tough stuff, or it will come back to bite us in some way. So really, that's what in a mad dash means.
I'm going to jump in, Warwick, before you ask another question, because something just struck me about this when I was looking at the little square box we use that indicates everybody's scores. This is, and I just double checked it through our prep documents for the whole series. This is the only profile, fascinating to me, that gets a neutral answer to anything, right? Their neutral answer is, my crucible moment is holding me back. Every other prompt that they get when people take this assessment, more than 11,000 people have taken it. Every other profile has either agree, high, strongly agree, something. But this is the only neutral one, which I think makes it stand out very uniquely on its own.
That is a great call, Gary. It does, because they see themselves moving ahead. They're moving ahead. They're moving. Things are getting done. Things are happening. So they don't feel physically held back. But there's something in that anger. But look how concretely they say, yep, I agree. I'm angry. I'm angry about how things have gone wrong in my life. So there is that feeling, I think. I think there's a conflict there, right? I think that neutral represents a conflict between saying, well, I'm moving ahead, I'm getting things done, I'm making things happen. But there's also that anger, right? In some ways, they're trying to look, this metaphor we've used repeatedly, they're trying to look ahead while also still anchored in the rearview mirror, right? And they're still anchored in the past. Somehow, emotionally, they're still anchored in the past, even though they're working so hard to move ahead. You might even think about it as a metaphor of like running through sand, or running with a weight around your belt, dragging a weight, right, behind you, right? That's how they're moving. That's a great observation.
Well, it's such good points, Gary and Cheryl. And yeah, before we move ahead, and far be it from us to move through this in a mad dash, I love what you're both saying. I mean, I think of this person, as you say, as this high capacity leader. I'm not going to be a victim, nothing to see here. I won't be weighed down by the past. I'm powering forward. Where am I powering forward? I don't know that it matters so much. I just need to be powering forward to something, something concrete. Let's move ahead. But, a lot of us can be in this profile, and there's this sense of, so many executives are like, I'm not going to wallow in the past and self-reflect. I mean, life's not about self-reflecting. Life's about action, and action now. Let's move. And so there's this sense that, we need to keep moving forward. But as you say, danger lies here if you move ahead without processing. It's sort of like the volcanoes are waiting to erupt. So it feels like a common profile. It's like, I'm not going to be held back. I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to power forward. I think what the particular vision probably isn't as important as having something to move ahead towards, right? That's the big thing. So Does that sort of make sense? It's like nothing to see here, powering forward. I'm not a victim. I won't be held down. Let's go. Kind of mentality.
I think sometimes it's easy to feel like that stopping to process your emotions is actually a luxury you don't have, right? I've told you both, some years ago, I went through a split in my business, and I ended up, splitting with the other owners in a business I owned. I had 10 employees who are now my responsibility. I had to figure out an office for them to be in. I had to figure out how they were going to get paid in 2 weeks. I felt like I didn't have the luxury to think about myself, right? But I also see how that was an excuse to not deal with what I was going through, right? So that's why I say it can be really complicated, because there may be very practical things that you have to power forward for, but it also can be a reason to not examine, to not self-reflect, and really process what's happened to you. And I think both of those things were true for me. And that I was both, I had real problems to solve, but I also used it as an excuse at the time not to deal with what I had gone through.
Talk a bit more about this particular profile and a person who is in a mad dash. What are they feeling? What are they going through? We kind of understand the profile a bit more, but what's going on inside of them? What are they feeling?
They're in a kind of denial, right? Because they think they have it handled or under control. But, anger will continue to eat at you. We all know this. Anger is not something you can just bury forever. It will eat you alive over time, right? You might not even feel angry. It might not be the experience. It may emerge as frustration, dissatisfaction, right? There are other ways that anger or that sadness or that trauma may be manifesting itself, right? But they're all in that group of emotions that you can push down, but they will not go away forever. They'll actually fester. Eventually those emotions come roaring up to the surface, right? And I think that is really the key, that this is the mad dasher is focusing on what's ahead, right? I can't worry about that right now. I'm going to push it down. I'm going to just focus on what's in front of me. And so they're running as fast as they can, but at some point, there's going to be that brick wall, something that you hit that's going to stop you in your tracks and sort of force you to process those emotions, right? At some point. It could be tomorrow, it could be next week, it could be next year, it could be in 30 years. But at some point, you're going to have to face and realize that you can't control that anger or keep it in a box. That box is going to explode at some point. It's either going to happen within you or something's going to make you stop outside. And I love this title, In a Mad Dash, because you're in effect trying to outrun that anger, that hurt, that sense of loss, but it's not really outrunnable.
In a sense, maybe if we wanted to try to get in the head of in a mad dasher, it's like if you want to run quickly, run effectively, the quickest way to move ahead is actually to pause and deal with the anger. The slow way, the ineffective way, the way that lets other people down, if you want to kind of play with their psychology, if you will, is to ignore it.
This profile is so interesting because these are the strongest among us, right? So often, right? These are people who are strong and capable, and that it's possible that much of their identity comes with being strong and capable and being able to get things done in the face of adversity.
So somebody taking this profile might be in an interesting position, because before they took the profile, I might be thinking, life's going about as good as it can. I'm succeeding. I'm powering forward. I'm not letting the past catch up to me. Things are good. Then they get this profile. It's like, wait, hang on. Maybe life isn't as rosy as I thought it was. Thank you so much, team at Beyond the Crucible. I was doing fine until I took your profile And now you tell me I have a problem. I never thought I had a problem. Thank you so much. So they might feel downcast, confused, frustrated at us, suggesting they take this assessment, frustrated at the output. So they might be saying, well, where am I? How did I get here? So talk to the person who's taken this and might feel confused, downcast, frustrated. I was fine until I took the assessment. Talk to the person who's just taken this and now has got these results.
Well, as we say, I'll be a broken record. Knowledge is power. Getting this profile gives you the opportunity to acknowledge that anger and do some significant self-care. I recently just talked to somebody who had taken a self-assessment, and they got this result. And it made them stop and really reflect and go, wow, what's unresolved, right? How often does somebody stop and ask you, so how do you feel about how things have gone in your life? And it's like, to really say, and then you answer, well, I'm pretty angry about it. How often that creates a significant moment for self-reflection. And I think one of the things as we've unpacked each of these profiles, including this one, it gives us a framework for really understanding what's going on with us, and can create language to start to say, okay, what's happening here? What am I holding on to or pushing down that I have to really acknowledge? And that's an exciting opportunity, because this person is, if I get this result, this is a high achiever. This is somebody who's making things happen and getting stuff done. But this getting this result allows you to take an inventory of your emotions and process them to fully heal. And then, because that takes a lot of energy to live with anger or hurt or sadness. Imagine this person is such a high performer. Now there's an opportunity to face those emotions, process them, and point those energies in a more productive direction toward the life you want, right? And because the energy you're putting toward pushing that anger down or that hurt or that sadness, that's not serving you. And that's energy that can be used toward the version that looks fully forward, not the one who's constantly looking over the shoulder or running through sand or being held back by a weight tied around their waist, right? Because if you're holding on to those emotions from what's happened to you, that means you're anchored in the past, even while you're running forward. Imagine if you can run unencumbered. And let's unpack that even a little further, right? Because one of the things we know, when people have processed their emotions, they're able to cast a new vision that they move toward and see how their crucible has happened not to them, but for them, right? This person is anchored in it happened to me. And so one of the questions that begs, and one of the moments, opportunities for reflection here is, maybe the vision I'm running to isn't mine or isn't mine anymore, right? Why am I holding on to anger, right? If I feel bad and angry about how things have gone in my life, maybe that's because where I'm running to doesn't feel like the right fit anymore.
We've talked about how, focusing or not focusing on anger, can hold you back. But there's a question here. You may be powering forward, but if you're in this profile, you need to just reflect not on the past, but is the vision I'm pursuing my authentic vision, or is it a reaction? Maybe there's a family business, or, your husband or wife is involved in it, and you feel like you need to take over the mantle. And there may be practical reasons for that in some sense, but it's worthy of thinking, am I just inheriting a vision? Am I doing it because it's practical? At a certain point, yes, maybe there's a period in which it makes sense, but I don't know about doing it for 20, 30 years. At some point, you need to ask yourself, am I inheriting a vision? Am I doing it because I don't want to let people down? People dependent on my husband, my wife, or, my team, my business partner. Is this really what I want to do? Is it my authentic vision, or is it a vision out of duty, obligation, or some other means? And people in this profile, they may indeed be, taking a path to down a true authentic vision, but maybe not. It's worthy of taking inventory of this before just plowing ahead, because it's quite possible it may not be your true authentic vision. You might have just fallen into it, or just, I need something. Let's go.
As somebody who relates to this profile, I'm also going to take the liberty to say this, which is, you might see yourself as a caretaker or somebody willing to sacrifice for others, which can feel and look very noble. But it also can be being a martyr, right? And saying, and it's the other side of the coin. It's like, so who's asking you to do that? Is that something you've self-imposed? Is it something you need to do, or something you're doing to fill some other hole, right, in yourself, right? Are others expecting this of you, or are you expecting this of you?
It's such a great question, which leads into really the next area to discuss, which is, okay, they're confused. They thought things are going well until they got the profile. Now they've got a lot to think about. But so let's say they've stopped in their tracks a bit, saying, gosh, is this my true authentic vision? Maybe things are holding me back. But what hope should somebody feel now that they've got this profile that says they're in a mad dash, and sort of like Houston, there is a problem, which they never thought before. So now they hopefully know there's a problem. What hope should they feel now that they've just realized there is a problem?
I think there's so much hope and opportunity. There's such an opportunity to see this optimistically and to get treated as a wake-up call, right? That says, it creates that opportunity for self-reflection, and ask yourself, what am I not facing? What do I have to do to process how I'm feeling, right? And the great thing is that this is, if you're in a mad dash, you are a high performer. You know how to make things happen. You know how to make this happen. You know how to process this. It's a moment to be vulnerable in the best way, which might feel uncomfortable, but to really be vulnerable, face what's going on with you, what you haven't dealt with, process through it, and really get to the other side toward a vision that you're so excited about, and a reality that you are able to create in hitting your stride, right? What's the difference between in a mad dash and hitting your stride? The difference is processing your emotions and ensuring that your vision is one that is authentic to you, right? Because you're able to turn it into reality. If you can turn what is out of alignment with where you are into reality, imagine what you can create when your emotions, your vision are in alignment. And I think that's so exciting. I think the question is, how do you get out of it, right? You have to stop and assess. You may need some help from a professional, therapist, faith leader, a coach, right, to help process through those emotions. You might maybe a grief counselor, whatever that looks like for you, right? Go work your way through those emotions, and then really, I think the world changes, your lens changes once you process through those emotions. And that's where the opportunity really starts to emerge and really create something exciting and new that really does feel like my crucible happened for me, not to me, right? That mindset shift that we talk about, that's so critical.
I think the good news is this profile, this person has all the tools in one sense to deal with it. They just have to focus their energy and high capacity on the twin issues that you so eloquently outlined, dealing with the anger of the crucible and making sure they're pursuing an authentic vision. So there's absolutely hope for somebody in this profile.
100%. That's absolutely true. It's a really exciting profile. And I think that's one of the reasons, that's why I love these profiles so much. I think they allow us to, they give us framework to think about what we're going through and to unpack what's happening with us. And even when, just by answering a handful of questions, to really unpack what's going on with us and sort of reflect back, so we have a moment to self-reflect and chart a new course forward. The steps are clear. What has to happen is clear. But the path also shows that no matter how strong you are, no matter how capable you are, no matter how high performing you look on the outside, we all can't skip a step, right? We all have to process what happens to us. None of us are greater than or stronger than the emotions that come from going through a trauma or loss or failure. They will always eventually stop us in our tracks. And the path, this is why this Trials to Triumphs roadmap is so powerful, because it makes it really clear, right? Nobody cuts the corners. It's just, we don't get to.
Okay, Cheryl, you just said the magic words, nobody cuts the corners. I'm sitting here thinking nobody would include the host of our show and the founder of Beyond the Crucible, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, I'm going to ask you this question, and depending on your answer, we have it would be a pretty remarkable thing that we can show viewers and listeners. So I'm going to ask you this question: was there a moment of mad dash for you in your bounce back from your crucible? Just say yes or no, and then I'll say something else, and then I'll turn you loose.
The answer is yes.
So what you have here, folks, thank you for that transparency and authenticity, Warwick. What we have here is, let's just camp here for a second. Of all the profiles so far, this is the sixth of the 6 profiles that we've discussed. Each one that we have gone through, Warwick has gone through. Warwick is, I jokingly say, patient 0 for Beyond the Crucible, in that, and it's true in the sense that, right, this brand was built from his crucible and how he bounced back from it. So here's just another bit of hope that you can hang on to, is Warwick passed through all of these stages. Many people pass through all of these stages. That's one of the things that we've discovered as we've gone through this assessment series, is that it's not like you get one and then you have a direct line to, maybe you have a direct line to hit in your stride, but in many cases you pass through other countries, as it were, on your way to that final destination. So, Warwick, let's talk a bit about your own in a mad dash moment. What did that look like for you?
It's very ironic because I live that profile, but yet my personality is not typical of this profile. I talk about myself being a reflective advisor, at least, when life is going in a normal way, I tend not to make decisions without thinking about it very carefully, maybe too carefully. But yet sometimes life comes along and puts you in a framework where you behave in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. And that was the case here. So I wouldn't say I'm a typical mad dasher in a sense, because I'm very reflective just by my own innate nature. But I did have a mad dash period in my life. So just to set the scene, listeners who've heard some of this obviously before, in my last year at Harvard Business School in 1987, my dad died earlier that year. I was from his third marriage. He was in his 80s at the time. And so that really precipitated a mad dash period. So once he died, the stock price of the company started rocketing up. Excuse me. The stock price of the company started rocketing up. The market felt the company was in play and ripe for takeover. I felt that the company had strayed from the vision of the founder. It was not being well managed. So at the time, in my youthful naivety, age 26, I felt like something has to be done. And with the way the company was being run from my perspective and the vision straying from the founder again, it matters less whether it's true or not. It's just that was my perspective. And for a lot more on this, feel free to read my book, Crucible Leadership, and we'll get into minute details about this. But I felt like something needed to be done. And if I didn't launch my own takeover, others might launch hostile takeovers, or, maybe just this, my perception of the company being not as well run would continue. So there was this mad dash from January 1987 until late August 1987 as I was organizing, the elements of the takeover. So then I launch it, and it takes a number of months for the takeover to conclude. So there was another period of mad dash from August 1987 until December 1987 when we took control of the company. And so we were just, running along like crazy. Excuse me. And then from December 1987 until December 1990, when we had to file for bankruptcy, unfortunately, with the company having too much debt, there was a whole series of refinancing, putting in new management, which, fortunately meant the operating profits of the company went up 80%, I suppose, testifying to maybe the company wasn't being as well run as it could have. But the debt was so high that, which is part of the consequence of the takeover, that it just felt like every day we were refinancing. So there was one point in which we were in New York talking to some investment banks about various refinancing options, went back to Australia, and within, 6-8 hours, I had to get back on the plane to go back to New York. I mean, it's like a 20-hour plus flight. It is not a short flight. Took about a mad dash. I mean, there was no chance even to get, through jet lag. I mean, it was just, several days of jet lag. It was just crazy. So, one of the things that I kind of realized in hindsight is there was definitely suppressed anger. My father had been removed as chairman 11 years before in 1976 by some other family members, which I felt was unjust. I was 15 at the time that happened. I may have been frustrated, significantly frustrated at decisions that management were making. And I probably, if I was being honest and self-aware, which even though I'm a self-aware person, I was just powering through at the time. I wasn't really taking the time to fully understand what was going on inside because there was no time for that. So, even if you have a self-reflective nature, given the right set of circumstances, you might find you're actually not doing what you would normally do. So I think, truth be told, I was somewhat resentful about being in the situation in the first place. Not so much that my dad had died, which obviously thrust me into a position that I kind of wasn't ready for, but there was conflict in the family going back many decades before he died, before I was born. And it's quite normal in family businesses. So part of me thought, like, if things had been run well, if family members had got on with each other, again, here it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong, I wouldn't have to be in this position. I wouldn't have to be thinking about the takeover. I'm doing this because of the mess that I inherited. At least that was emotionally what I was thinking. But I wasn't really fully thinking about all that. I mean, maybe once in a while, but I was just thinking, okay, it's like I might, live in, like a lobster in boiling water. I might be living in boiling water. It's pretty frustrating. I don't like it, but it is what it is. And this is my life. The world is full of boiling water and you just got to deal with it, don't complain, move ahead, deal with it, which is sort of my mentality. So yeah, it was sort of a strange position. For somebody that is inherently a reflective person to be in a mad dash instead of an out-of-body experience, but that was the reality of those years, after my dad died and up until the company went bankrupt.
And it's interesting, Cheryl, you and I have talked about this before. There was an early iteration of the assessment with profiles, and one of them was the good soldier. And that's the one that matches sort of most closely to In a Mad Dash. And that sounds like what Warwick is describing a little bit more of the good soldier than a mad dasher. A lot of stuff in common. But there was a reason why the Mad Dasher came out as the profile that we use for this final version of the assessment. So yeah, that's an interesting perspective, Warwick. But we all know this too. This too to be true, Warwick. You're not still in the mad dash. You, like everyone else who may have, as you said earlier, may feel downcast having gotten this result. Cheryl knows somebody who got this result and was a little gobsmacked by it. Good news, hope. Again, folks, Warwick cast this vision years ago when he just off the top of his head had what we call a Warwickism, where he said, we're dealers in hope. That's what we are at Beyond the Crucible. And here's another example of hope, because Warwick just described his mad dash years. Guess what? He's no longer in a mad dash. How did you get out of that, Warwick?
Well, it's a strange thing, but in some ways, many ways, having to file for bankruptcy was a gift to me personally. Clearly not to the thousands of employees, not to other family members. There was a lot of consequences of the decision I made to do the takeover. It wasn't all my fault. Obviously, there was a lot of friction in the decades leading up to it, but certainly what I did didn't help and at all in many ways. But to me personally, there's no way, as you say, a bit like the good soldier, I would never have left the John Fairfax Limited Company, Fairfax Media, voluntarily. I love my father dearly. I didn't want to disappoint him in his memory, the legacy of my great-great-grandfather, John Fairfax, a person of faith. As I've often said, wonderful husband, good dad, employees loved him, elder at his church. I mean, why wouldn't you want to emulate that kind of a vision? I mean, this is somebody that did good to everyone around him. I mean, when he died, his employees said, we've lost a kind and valued friend. There were no worker rights laws in the 1800s. I mean, that's almost unimaginable, unthinkable. So, of course, I never would have felt like I could ignore that vision. It would be just betraying everything that's good in the world from my construct. So, in a sense, me being forced to leave was a gift. It, forced me to reflect, and it took years to do it. It wasn't easy. I realized I wasn't cut out to be, in charge of a large media company that's take no prisoners, corporate takeover person, if you will. I'm more of a reflective advisor. So it absolutely, didn't fit who I was as a human being. But clearly, as good a vision as it was to have independent newspapers trying to make a difference in the nation of Australia, that's a good vision. But it wasn't my vision. It wasn't my true, authentic vision. And as I've reflected, it wasn't even my dad's vision. He would have been a better philosophy professor. He was very intellectual, loved discussing things with people with different political views or different religious views. He just had this open-minded desire to seek truth and just converse on significant issues, which is much to be admired. But, being a professor at a university would have been such a better fit. So neither of us were really living our true, authentic vision, truth be told. So it was all about duty and obligation. It took me a while to forgive myself, forgive others. But really, Fairfax Media, John Fairfax Limited, falling out of family control was, to me personally, a gift. It took years to figure out. But without that, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to reflect. Without that, I wouldn't have. One of the things I really had to reflect on is it okay to have my own vision? That felt absolutely wrong to me. Life is about serving other people's needs, not your needs don't matter. Your personal needs are irrelevant. That's self-centered and selfish. That took me years to unlearn. It's okay to live your vision. It's okay to live, from my perspective, in line with the way God designed you to live. And maybe, whether the vision comes from God or from your inner self, however you view life, that's not wrong to live in light of a vision that is really your true, authentic vision. But it took me years to unlearn those, self-imposed or wherever those lessons, false lessons came from. So, but basically the company, me being forced to leave, that was a gift, but it took me a while to learn those lessons, to let go of the anger at myself and others perhaps, but also to realize, to give myself permission, it's okay to find my true authentic vision and pursue it. I feel fine about it now, but it was not an easy process to get there. I had a lot to unlearn, I got to say.
Cheryl, I'm going to give you, as our special guest star throughout this series, you've heard Warwick now. You've been surprised with me, perhaps certainly less surprised than I have been that he's gone, and certainly less surprised than he's been that he's gone through all of these. But I'll give you the last word for both Warwick's In the Mad Dash discussion and any other profiles. I mean, what's your reaction? How do you sum up what we've shared with folks about Warwick's story and how it crosses not just this one, but the other profiles as well?
Well, first of all, thanks, Gary, for asking. I actually think it's no wonder that beyond the Crucible and its mission of helping people move past their worst days, it's no wonder that it is Warwick's vision, right? I think it's a unique vision, and one that I'm excited to be a part of. But I think that, we didn't know, these are the profiles that emerged from the study. And even as we didn't know, even until we were preparing for this one, if Warwick would have a story that related to each of these visions, each of these profiles, excuse me. We didn't know if Warwick would have a story to relate to each of these profiles. And if he didn't, that was fine. But I do think it reinforces the "you are here" point that we make, that these profiles are not permanent personality identifiers. They are actually moments in time, right? Post-Crucible moments in time. Where are you at? And that all of us can be given the circumstance that we're in. It is fully a reflection of where you are and how you see the world at a certain moment of time. And I think that's something that has been reinforced by Warwick being able to relate and having these stories that at very different points in his life, really reflecting different profiles. I think it reinforces what the data told us, which is this is not about who you are, what zip code you live in, what age you are, what gender, what job you have. It does not matter. It's all about at this moment of time, how do you see the world and yourself as it relates to the world? And then the profile gives you an opportunity to reflect on that and a path to know what to do about it. And it's really exciting to have these discussions and watch that prove out through story.
Right. And it's great that you said the "you are here" spot on the map. It's not the end of it. It's not "you are here," period, or "you are here," exclamation point. It's "you are here," comma. And then, but you can get beyond here. You can keep moving. You can get to those other places if you need to have other pit stops along some of the other profiles. But ultimately, you can get to hitting your stride in the life of significance that we all crave to have. We have some podcast guests who have traversed this same ground. And the first one that we're going to talk about, we talk about 3 every episode. Sorry, Warwick, it's not 7. I know that's your favorite number sometimes, but we have 3 to talk about. The first one that we have to talk about is Tracy J. Edmonds. Her story was she was, from the outside looking in, she's one of these people who couldn't have had what looked like a sweeter life. She was a high-profile executive with a Fortune 30 company, and she excelled. But on the inside, her career would come at a high cost because of her imposed Crucible. She was not her authentic self. Here's some things she said about just a short paragraph, and then I want to get your perspective on it, Warwick, of what she went through in her when she was in her mad dash moment. This is a direct quote from her from the podcast where we interviewed her. The reality was, she said, despite all that success I just mentioned, I was miserable. I had achieved success. I was making good money. I had the corner office. Literally, I had the corner office that overlooked the little brook in the back. It was beautiful. I had an assistant that sat right outside my door, and I was miserable. I was on the phone from morning to evening. I was exhausted when I got home. I wasn't as fully engaged with my children, and I've worked for this company 20 years. How do I reach this point? I was doing something I didn't even care about. I came to a company for tuition reimbursement, and 20 years later, I'm regional vice president of operations, and I'm going, okay, how the hell did I get here? That sums up in a mad dash, doesn't it?
It surely does, Gary. I mean, Tracy Edmonds has an incredible story. She's an African-American woman that became very successful in the corporate world, but she did it at great personal cost to herself and her own identity. And she wrote this book, Wild Hair. And her book it's really an outward manifestation of an inner turmoil that was going on within her. And so, as a lot of African-American women will know, there's this sense that you have to tame your hair, spending literally 3 or 4 hours in the salon on a Saturday because it takes so long. You can't do it at the end of the day. At least it's pretty difficult. It takes who has that kind of time. It damages your hair. And there's this sense, and this is a direct quote from Tracy, you're trying to be white, basically. You try to, fit the corporate mold. And there's this great pressure to do that. And so she spent her whole life climbing up the ladder. She got married, had kids, was working late, and felt guilty about not spending enough time with her family. Yes, she had the corner office, but she was almost trying to live up to somebody else's vision. The sense of, she wanted to, who doesn't want to be successful? But it was the sense as you're rising up, it's hard not to do that when it's like, look, I'm achieving things that a lot of other folks from where I come from haven't achieved. There's probably a sense of obligation, a sense of try to, represent a success story. But it just came at a tremendous personal cost. And she finally hit the wall. And it's almost as if she said, what am I doing? Whose life am I living? I mean, the hair was only just the outward manifestation, as I mentioned, of the inner turmoil. Why am I doing this? This is crazy. And so she just hit this moment in which she said, I'm just not going to do it anymore. And she quit. I mean, she went one day to the salon and just said, I'm not doing it. I am not doing it. And I think the hairstylist said, I don't know if she said finally, or, you don't really want to tell people, your clients, what to do and not to do. You feel like it's not my place. But I think for her close friends and certainly that hairstylist, it was like, hallelujah, hooray. It's not good for your hair. And so, but that was a huge shift because, showing her natural hair, wild hair, and from her, as she calls it, she didn't look corporate again, as she sees it. It looked different. A lot of people said, hey, this is wonderful. Some might have been, this is a little different, whether they said anything or not, it's pretty clear what they were thinking, but it was a very, very brave moment for her.
Yeah. And for her, a wild hair moment is more than just about her hair. And I'm thankful for that because I can't have wild hair moments anymore. But she said this about it. She said, I define a wild hair moment as a point in your career when you hit a crossroad and ask, am I being true to myself? You just described that, Warwick. What do I really want in my career? It's in that moment when you choose you, your authentic self. And she's gone on to become a coach and a speaker who helps women do this very thing. So really, really strong, a strong example of how you can be in a mad dash, how you can take that pause. You can finally, even though you're a high achiever and everybody thinks you're successful from the outside, if you don't feel that way, that's what matters. She leaned into those feelings. She learned from them. She made a change. It was one small step, right? Kind of small. She just changed her hair. She didn't move to a different country. And look what happened. As to use Cheryl's phrase, we're going to get it in every episode, the flywheel began to turn for Tracy J. Edmonds, and now she is living her life of significance.
One of the other things I love about Tracy's stories is she decided, I'm not living my true authentic vision. So she left the corporate world, and she speaks and advocates in particular for young African-American women that says they don't have to fit some other mold, some corporate mold. And so she meets with young African-American women in colleges and elsewhere who they feel compelled to straighten their hair. And she's able to tell them, you don't have to do that. You can just be you. You know, hopefully times are changing, but you can be you. You can pursue your true authentic vision. You don't have to fit some other mold. She feels passionately about that vision because it comes out of her own crucible. It's her own mission, her true authentic vision. And she, as we often say, she is off the charts passionate about it. And she's making a difference. She is a very joyful person. I think she's probably always been that way, but her level of joy is at another level. She has a mission that she truly cares about. It's others-centered. It's purpose-driven vision. And she's doing a lot of good in this world. And she's not living some other person's life. She's living her own life. And it's an amazing thing to see.
Yeah. And Cheryl, I know that her story, I know that her story, Cheryl, moved you too. So what's your reflections on Tracy J. Edmonds?
So what really, when you were talking about it, what really struck me was this moment. How the hell did I get here? Right?
Right.
I think,
right.
Look, this is the value of the you are here moment, of knowing where you are. What we mean by knowledge is power. Think about it. If you're lost, right? Say you're walking through a city and you're lost. The first thing you do is stop and go, where am I? Right? From there, that's the anchor for which you can start moving in the direction that you want to go. First thing is the you are here moment. How do I figure out where I am? From there, I can orient where I need to go. But first, you've got to acknowledge the lostness, say, right? Where am I right now? That's how I move forward. And that her story exhibits so clearly that moment of where am I and how did I get here?
Yeah. The next podcast guest that we're going to speak about, Cheryl, is someone who you know well. That's Karen Austin, who we had on the show. And Karen, as Warwick does all the time on the show, ask about backstory. And Karen's backstory had some devastating points. Her older brother kind of stepped away from the family. He eventually, after an attempted suicide, succeeded. Terrible trauma in that. So much so that, she says that by the time her son was born in 1981, she was having panic attacks and got agoraphobia because she was afraid to leave the house. These emotions unprocessed from crucibles that we've talked about. She has another crucible that comes up later on in which this isn't the crucible, folks. She meets a man named Trace. She's named Tracy. Her husband's named Trace. They have this great marriage. Lo and behold, a couple decades into that marriage, Trace is diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer. And she has to be his caregiver. Doesn't have to be. She embraces it, but all of the emotions that go with that, very, very, very difficult. Warwick, talk a little bit about the in a mad dash moments of her life, particularly as they pertain to what she went through when she was a little younger.
Yeah, Gary. I mean, she's somebody that powered through in life. Life was not easy. Her mom died at a relatively young age. She loses her brother to suicide. As she puts it, she never really mourned. She talks about the difference between grieving, which is sort of an inward aspect, but mourning is more outwardly dealing with it, both to others, to yourself. And she never really gave herself a chance to mourn. But she just shoved it down into the basement. Nothing to see here. Okay, my brother died, my mother died. I mean, those are massive crucibles to deal with. But she just never dealt with it. She just powered forward. And there were consequences of this. She had panic attacks. She had agoraphobia, which, fear of large spaces. Clearly, there were warning signs, as she puts it, her body saying, look, it's time to take care of this. It's time to deal with these emotions you've never expressed. But she never really did. She just powered forward with life and her career. And then she gets this tragic diagnosis. She'd been married to her husband, Trace, for I think almost 20 years. He was about to retire. They were about to have just this wonderful time of travel, and he would find sort of a new vision and a new, second act, if you will. And he gets this cancer diagnosis out of the blue that it's basically terminal. There is almost no hope. I think it's maybe 5% chance of things working out. And this time she decided, in a moment of immense courage, to handle it differently. She was going to not just grieve, but mourn. She was going to just deal with those emotions, those horrific emotions, just the love of her life. How do you deal with that? It's got to be horrendous. But she decided, I'm not going to deal with it the way I dealt with my mother's and brother's death. I'm going to, live in the moment. We're going to make the best of our, last months together. But I'm not going to suppress the emotions. I'm going to deal with it. And it took so much courage of how she dealt with that. It was just, nobody wants that opportunity to do things differently. I'm sure that's an opportunity she never would have wished for. Just a horrific circumstance. But to her great credit, she dealt with it very differently than those earlier tragedies.
And Cheryl, I want to get your view because you do know her, but this is something she told us on the podcast that builds on what Warwick just said. Because I had this previous experience with grief and death and mourning, knowing how not to do it, I intentionally got to choose how to go do it. I got to choose what went on in the basement, right? What went on in the basement, what got allowed down in the basement. I got to say out loud in person on social media what it's like to lose your husband. And I still do it. She grabbed hold of that experience that had left her in a mad dash. She wasn't facing her grief. She grabbed hold of it. She took that pause that we've talked about, changed her perspective, changed her life. Talk a little bit about Karen's story, Cheryl.
And you were there when we were looking at these profiles, Gary. Karen's story was the number one story that came to mind when we saw this profile, right?
Yep.
And I think one of the, Karen now has turned this story into a mission, a life of significance that's so profound, which is helping people process death and process grief, right? And that is such an extraordinary vision. And I think it's as we've talked about these profiles, it just strikes me so powerfully how many people have, when you think about your crucible happening not to you, but for you, have turned their crucibles into lives of significance that are so profoundly impactful for other people. It's a wonderful journey, right? You see these extraordinary journeys, and I think Karen is one of those extraordinary journeys, somebody who pushed down all that grief until it had to be dealt with, and then use that to learn to not only deal with her own grief when it happened again in a whole new way, but to really help others learn how to deal with grief.
She called it to us when we talked to her, a beautiful, horrible experience. What a beautiful phrase.
And that's just an amazing phrase, Gary, that it was a beautiful, horrible experience. She talked about it being a beautiful gift, obviously not the tragedy of what her husband went through, but she, out of this experience, just has a different perspective. She talked about learning to give herself grace. I think for a lot of folks in this profile, grace is probably a very foreign concept. I'm powering through. People depend on me. I don't have time to, for self-pity, which is not really what we're talking about, but that's how they might see it. I don't have time to focus on myself. I don't have time to just express my emotions. I got to be strong for everybody. But she learned that it's okay to give yourself grace. It's okay to sit with pain. I'm sure there were times when she wept and sobbed. That's okay. It doesn't mean you're a weak person. It means you're human going through intense pain. It's okay. It's okay to mourn, to grieve, to feel pain. And so she is being on a mission in which she helps other people who will go through this not to stuff their emotions, to express them, to learn how to mourn in the true full sense of the word, and to learn it's okay to be in pain.
And the third podcast guest is someone I know pretty well, and that's Lauren Sisler. And Lauren Sisler's story, if you heard it on the show, folks, you know how amazing, how just horribly amazing it is. She was a freshman at Rutgers University, a gymnast there. And she was away from home for the first time, and that was all going great. But then she got a phone call one night from her dad, who told her that her mom had passed away. She didn't get any more information than that. She was panicky. She didn't know what to do, but made arrangements to fly back home. Her dad was going to pick her up at the airport. And this is how she described what happened when she got to the airport. The plane touched down and I run outside. I'm expecting my dad to be there. I'm looking everywhere and I don't see him. So I stand out there for a few minutes. And the next thing you know, I see a Jeep Cherokee pull up and out jumps my uncle and my cousin, Justin. She gets in the car, they start driving, and she, is sitting there for a while. And at this point, she's crying and nobody said anything to her. And she said to her uncle, Uncle Mike, I just want to see my dad. Where's my dad? And then he pulled the car off the side of the road and he said, I'm sorry, Lauren, but your dad's passed away too. Let me just put those 2 points together. Her parents, in separate incidents, died within 24 hours of each other. She learns that her mom dies, flies home to be with her dad, finds out her dad dies in the car with her uncle. It would all end up, she would learn, but not, she wouldn't accept. She would learn, but she wouldn't accept for almost 2 decades how they died. They died of secret opioid addictions. Warwick, I know when I told you of Lauren's story at first, before we even had her on the show, you were shocked by it. When you talked to her, that was, it's just a heartbreaking story, isn't it?
It really is. Lauren is somebody that's achieved a lot. She's gone on to be a commentator with the SEC Network and ESPN. She was a gymnast in high school and college. And she just had this tragic circumstance where both her parents had chronic pain. Her dad had been in the military and also suffered from PTSD. And as is often the case when you have chronic pain, get prescriptions for pain medication, and it turns out it was fentanyl. And so it's understandable why that was prescribed, but as sometimes happen, and all too often, they became addicted to this pain medication. So neither of these people were looking to get into this circumstance. It just happened because of their chronic pain. And so, within almost hours of each other, having both parents die was just unthinkable. And it's just not something that she could process. She just couldn't fathom talking to friends in college. Yeah, my parents died of, drug overdoses. It's like, well, what? Your parents were drug addicts? It was like, well, there's a context there, but clearly, the chronic pain, but it just felt like humiliating to her. Like she just could not talk about it. When her aunt said, I've got this manila envelope and it's got the toxicology reports of your parents' death, she just threw it on the floor of the car and I don't want to look at it. I just, nothing to see here. She just would not look at it. It took years for her to look at it. And that was really a symbol of her refusing to deal with those negative emotions with that crucible. I'm not going to let this get me down. I'm not even going to admit that it happened almost. I'm not going to admit. Yeah, clearly she was, I'm sure, angry, sad, heartbroken, but she just would not even admit the totality of what happened. And she just kept powering forward. And that middle envelope was a symbol of, I will not deal with this crucible. I'm not going to deal with the anger and emotions. I'm going to power forward. I'm in a mad dash. We're just going to, nothing to see here. I will not deal with it. It was a graphic depiction of emotionally what was happening inside of her.
In fact, it just popped into my head about this. There's nothing to see here. She's doing fine. One of the things that Lauren Sisler's known for as a sideline reporter for ESPN college football is something called the sideline shimmy. Okay. If you look up Lauren Sisler and sideline shimmy, I promise it won't give you any bad results. You'll see videos of her doing this on the sideline. And what it is, it's her just doing a goofy dance, which she started to do before she went live in her ESPN college football broadcast because she was nervous. And it's become her calling card. And she was doing this all the while she refused to open that manila envelope. But here's the moment where she changed her mind. She opened it up, and here's where it's brought her. And I want to get both of your perspectives on where she's at now after I read this. Now, looking back, she told us when we interviewed her, as I reflect on this journey, I realize that refinement, there's that word, part of what happens in the after your crucible process, right? I realize that refinement has really happened, and it's taken time. It's been a long journey and a long process. But as I'm here today, I realize now that it has been revealed to me that as I stand here, that my story has meaning and has a purpose. And I'm so thankful that I've been able to see that through this evolution and this process, going from being this 18-year-old completely clueless, how am I going to survive this? And now 20 years later, having this platform to share other people's stories. I mean, so many of those words I just read in like 3 sentences of hers are things we say all the time at Beyond the Crucible. It's just fascinating to me.
Oh, absolutely, Gary. I mean, I love the fact that she came to a point where she was no longer going to suppress these emotions. She had the courage. It took a few years, but I think with all of us, we come to a point when we're ready. She opened that manila envelope and she came to terms with the fact that her parents had died of fentanyl overdoses. She came to terms with those emotions, and she decided she was no longer going to suppress the truth or the emotions surrounding that truth. And she has indeed used that pain to fuel a mission, to come alongside other people that have gone through really tough experiences with the death of family members or other very deep-seated emotions, to not suppress them, but to deal with them, be open about those emotions, and find a positive way forward. She is really now an advocate for other people, just finding ways to not bottle up your emotions, to deal with it, be honest about it. And that's a way of moving forward. And as you know, Gary, she's got a book coming out, Shatterproof. I think it comes out in May, and just telling her story, and importantly, teaching others how to become shatterproof themselves. So hers is a story of hope, but she finally dealt with those emotions, and she is an advocate for others to help them deal with their emotions. She definitely has purpose from these horrific circumstances that she's gone through.
Cheryl, I see you smiling a lot, so you must have something to say.
I'm just so wowed as we put these profiles, these data-driven profiles together with these real people's stories. I'm just so wowed at how the human capacity to turn, bad things happen, but to turn those bad things into good that make the world a better place, that positively impact others, to actually help others survive their crucibles, right? And thrive, right? And how that there's such a virtuous cycle in that is just so beautiful. right? The human capacity to turn bad into good is really awesome. And that's what we mean when we say, my crucible didn't happen to me, it happened for me. And that, and what Warwick says when he says, you know, how do I actually turn my crucible into a life of significance? And the significance that people have found. And it doesn't mean that other things they do are not significant, but that they're able to do something that has such a profoundly, to take that moment of intense pain and turn that into something so amazing and positively impactful. When, you know, Karen Austin may have said, my beautiful, horrible life, but I think it's that same narrative, turning, you know, horror and profound loss and often tragedy into beauty. What a wow. There's so much hope in every crucible, I think.
Well, Warwick, it comes down again to you and final thoughts. And I'll ask you for a couple sets of final thoughts. This is the last episode we have that will talk about the profiles in this kind of detail. We have one more episode next week, which will wrap up some of our learnings that we have from the show. So, you know, we've covered a lot of ground as we always do. What are your final thoughts about this episode? And if you have any final thoughts about all the profiles we've talked about, the 6 now that we've talked about, share those with our listeners and viewers too.
For folks who are in a mad dash, I get what it's like. I had my own mad dash period, despite me not always thinking that I'm a mad dash kind of person, but I certainly had that time when I was. I get it. You know, you want to suppress the truth, suppress the pain, nothing to see here. I'm not a victim. I can power through anything. I mean, one of the qualities I have, which is both a gift and a challenge, is I have very high perseverance. So if there's something that needs to be gotten through, I'm like, okay, what's the next step? How do we get through it? You know, let's solve the problem. Let's move ahead. There is part of my personality, as I reflect on it, that probably does have a bit of a mad dash perspective, even when I'm not in the midst of a $2 billion plus takeover. But you know, I get the idea, power through. I'm not a victim. I'm going to not let this hold me back. But that way of thinking doesn't serve you. Ultimately, that way of thinking will lead you to going off a cliff and a volcano, bursting. It's almost inevitable. It's not, for a lot of folks who are in this profile, they're smart business executives. It's not the smart play. It's not the winning play. It's not the long-term sustainable play. Smart executives want long-term sustainable growth. That is, the goal of every major business person. Well, to have long-term sustainable growth as a human being, you have to deal with the truth. You have to deal with the emotions, whether it's through counseling, a minister of, a faith minister, a friend, whatever will serve you in that situation. You've got to find a way to deal with the anger, deal with the grief. You've got to find a way to make sure that the vision you have is truly your vision, not a vision of obligation, a vision, an inherited vision like it was for me, a vision in which I've got people depending on me. It's got to be your true, authentic vision. If you do that, you can use that inherent mad dash quality of feeling like, I'm going to overcome that hurdle. You can use it in a positive way to overcome and deal with the negative emotions and the pain you went through, and to find a vision that's truly yours. So it's absolutely possible. This is mission possible for somebody in a mad dash to deal with the past, deal with the emotions, and find a way to live in light of your vision, not somebody else's. So, as you're asking Gary about just these profiles, and we'll obviously talk more next time, more detailed reflections, I want to echo what Cheryl said, is that these profiles, they're moments in time. They're not the end of your story. We can move to really the first profile, hitting your stride, where we've dealt with the emotions, the crucible, we've found our true, authentic vision, and we feel like we're living a life of significance, a life on purpose, dedicated to serving others. Doesn't mean there won't be other crucibles that will come up, but you feel like you've got a set of tools, you know how to deal with them, and you're moving forward in a productive, joy-filled, other-centered way. So, each one of these profiles, and you can go from one to the other, as subtly, I guess I have, which who knew? I didn't realize before we recorded these podcasts. But, being in any one of these profiles is not the end of your story. There is a hope-filled future. There is a path forward. And I think with each of these profiles, we've shown, and we've had examples in every single one of these podcasts in which people have found a way to move forward, to find a way to live a life of significance, a life on purpose dedicated to serving others. So there is a path forward. So I think these discussions, I think, has given us hope. So
for some reason, I have the desire to do what Hulk Hogan used to do in the 90s and go like this, because I'm going to say the same thing I say at the end of every episode. I've been in the communications business long enough, folks, to know when the final word on a subject's been spoken. Warwick's just spoken it. If you want to join us on this journey, head over to beyondthecrucible.com and take the free self-assessment. You'll get your results lickety-split, and you can discover where you are on the map now and how to get from where you are now to your unique life of significance. So head to beyondthecrucible.com and take this assessment, and be sure to join us next week as we recap the key things we've learned during this series. You will not want to miss it. If you enjoyed this episode, learned something from it, we invite you to engage more deeply with those of us at Beyond the Crucible. Visit our website, beyondthecrucible.com, to explore a plethora of offerings to help you transform what's been broken into breakthrough. A great place to start? Our free online assessment, which will help you pinpoint where you are on your journey beyond your crucible and to chart a course forward. See you next week.